Hello and welcome. I'm Brett Theodos, Senior Fellow at the Urban Institute, where I lead our Community Economic Development Hub. Very happy that you could join us for this session. We are talking today about rural America. Rural areas we feel are places that are underappreciated for their diversity, vitality, innovation. But we do know that persistent poverty is holding back about 1 in 7 rural counties. A coalition led by 6 community development financial institutions, or CDFIs, is committed to addressing these issues and transforming rural areas of persistent poverty into rural areas of persistent opportunity, places that are characterized by racial equity. These groups cover a broad and diverse set of America, different regions from Appalachia to the Mississippi Delta, Deep South, Rio Grande Valley, the Western US, Native communities across the country. They provide financial investments, technical assistance, education, and other supports. They address community needs like housing and small business finance and assistance and commercial and community facilities and healthy food and drinking water and sanitary systems and so on. And we at the Urban Institute have had the opportunity to document this PRT effort with co-authors Corianne Scally and Yipeng Su and Lance Lawthorne and Anya Hariharan and Jorge Morales Burnett. I'm excited to release a report today that summarizes the model. And also we've built a framework by which the coalition can judge its success and its opportunities for refinement. So a couple of thanks, especially to Jose Quinones at PRT, really who has been our guide throughout this process and manager. And thanks also to Katrina Badger at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for providing the resources for this work. So a couple of housekeeping things that I'm going to go through. First, the event is being recorded and will be posted online. So if you can't catch all of it right now, or you want to share it with folks, know that it will be there. It's on the same page as you're finding it now, the event page. Next, we have captions to improve accessibility. You can turn those off as well. Speaker bios, as we posted about, are online and you can find them there. All participants are going to be muted throughout the session, but we do want to hear from you. So if you would put your questions and your comments in the Q&A box, we'd love to get those. And also we'd love to get your feedback. So we will have a survey at the end of the event. So by way of transition, I'll just say that we're excited today to provide a forum where we can hear directly from this all-star lineup of rural serving CDFI CEOs, all 6 of them. So I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Corianne, who's going to moderate our session.
Great, thanks so much, Brett. Hi, everyone, I'm Corianne Scally. I'm a Principal Research Associate here at the Urban Institute, whose work focuses on housing and community development in urban and rural communities with a racial justice and health equity lens. I'm really pleased to introduce our 6 panelists to you today and to moderate the discussion. You can find their full bios online, of course, but I'm going to provide a brief introduction before we get started. First, I'd like to introduce Suzanne Anardi, who is CEO of the Rural Community Assistance Corporation, which provides training, technical and financial resources and advocacy so rural communities can achieve their goals and visions, including housing, community and economic development opportunities. Next, we have Bill Bynum, who is CEO of HOPE, a family of organizations that provides financial services and engages in advocacy to combat the extent to which factors such as race, gender, birthplace, and wealth limit one's ability to prosper. Next, we have Crystal Cornelius, who is president and CEO of the Owista Corporation, a national Native CDFI intermediary predominantly serving Native communities across the United States, Alaska, and Hawaii, and has dedicated her career to capitalizing and building the organizational capacity of Native communities, upholding tribal sovereignty and self-determination measures. She's an enrolled member of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin and a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians located in North Dakota. Next, we have Jim King, who is CEO of FAHI, a membership and community development financial institution that provides financial products and services to its members focused on housing and serving Appalachia. Next, we have Nick Mitchell-Bennett, who is Executive Director of CDCB and Administrator of the Rio Grande Valley Multibank, CDFI, which is headquartered in Brownsville, Texas, where his work is devoted to utilizing collaborative partnerships to create sustainable communities across the Rio Grande Valley through quality education, model financing, efficient home design, and superior construction. And last but certainly not least, we have Ines Polonius, who is CEO of Communities Unlimited, a CDFI and rural development hub serving the rural South with a team of 72 full-time professionals that work side by side with local leaders to create fair access to resources needed to sustain healthy communities, healthy businesses, and healthy families. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to have this conversation with you all. So to get us started, I'd like to pose an introductory question that you'll each have a couple minutes to answer. Your organizations operate as traditional CDFIs, providing access to capital, but also as hubs for rural development and capacity building. Can you tell us a bit about the role your organization serves in addressing rural persistent poverty? And Suzanne, we're going to start with you, if that's okay.
Sure, thank you, Corianne. RCAC works in the rural West, Western 13 states, including Alaska and Hawaii. And initially we began as a training and technical assistance provider. And we work across indigenous communities, rural communities, and much of it persistent poverty, including the Central Valley of California, as well as the various regions where we have indigenous families living. We start with infrastructure. We do water and wastewater. We have tribal circuit riders that provide technical assistance across Indian country and indigenous communities in Alaska and Hawaii, helping sustain, improve, and stay compliant with wells and water systems and wastewater systems. We also have a robust housing arm. We are a mutual self-help intermediary serving the rural West. We have about 54 groups on the ground that are helping low and very low income families build their own homes. We are active in the 502 USDA mortgage. We package those. We also train packagers. And then we have several indigenous housing, tribal housing excellence programs, including development and academy. We also are very active in economic development. We have a building rural economies model that works both with communities, but also trains cohorts of entrepreneurs, helping them build a business plan, and then accessing our coaching, which is very specific to our work and very valuable. Interestingly, the majority of our building rural economies cohorts have been in regions with participants that are mainly indigenous. So it's really exciting to see that process. And lastly, we have our CDFI arm, and we've been a CDFI for about 20 years. And we work very diligently to fill the gaps, if you will, in capital deployment in persistent poverty communities, as well as other rural communities. I think one of the things that we continue to work on is how to shift that power paradigm of a top-down approach with capital to really understanding the needs on the ground and trying to access capital that fits those needs rather than the other way. So
wonderful. Thank you so much.
RCAC.
Thank you so much. Bill, can we have you jump in and tell us a little bit about the role that your family of organizations at Hope serves?
Sure, thanks, Corinne. It's really been an interesting evolution. When we started 26 years ago, we were a small business development organization. The objective was to try to improve conditions along the river here in Mississippi, Arkansas, and Louisiana, a region that has long been associated with poverty and racial strife. And we found that our initial tool for accomplishing that was to finance small businesses, manufacturers to help create jobs to pay decent wages and good benefits. We learned very quickly that there was more needed than just financing for manufacturers. Interestingly, there were actually more manufacturers per capita here than there were in other parts of the country, but there wasn't the other supports that make a community strong: small businesses, quality housing, infrastructure, healthcare, childcare, a range of things that other places take for granted, but aren't available in many of the communities that we all serve. And while financing is a critical tool, it's not adequate to addressing those needs. And so we eventually found that we were playing a very different role than we contemplated. We were the shadow economic development arm in communities where the mayor was doing everything, but they didn't have grant writers. They didn't have relationships with members of Congress, with banks, with businesses. And we were able to close those gaps. And increasingly, that's what we've been doing over the years, is filling in the gaps that disproportionately limit opportunity in so many rural communities, particularly communities of color here in the Deep South and across the country. And fortunately, we've got a great team at Hope that can go toe-to-toe with bankers and any bankers that I'm aware of in terms of really making financing work for some of the most under-resourced people and places in the country, but also taking the data from the communities we serve and amplifying their voices in halls of power who control resources that affect their lives. We see that so much we see it now with the federal dollars that get to some and not to others, that has had so many businesses of color close over the past year and a half, that have so many people losing their homes or being evicted because of the disparate application of policy. And so we weigh in on their behalf and take their voices to halls of power. And we do it ourselves, but we are much more effective by aligning ourselves with our peer CDFIs in Native communities, along the Texas-Mexico border and in the Central Valley in Appalachia. Collectively, we are cross-section of what America, an increasingly diverse America, looks like. And so it's really great to have these allies to help us advocate on their behalf. So the policy is as important as the program. Financing is critical. Anything that people need to support their families, you got to have, at some point, you have to have financial services, which are disproportionately not available in the opportunity deserts we serve. But to get those resources, to get that investment, you've got to stand up and speak truth to power. And we can do that much more effectively as a collaborative.
Yeah, thank you so much. Crystal, can you tell us a bit about the niche that OWISTA serves?
Happy to, thank you. OWISTA Corporation was created 20 years ago specifically to serve Native communities and more so address the lack of capital that we were finding throughout what we deem Indian country. When we look at this, we have 573 federally recognized tribes in the United States. We have 60 state recognized tribes, and we have over 30 unrecognized tribes. So really important to note in the dynamic of our target market, which encompasses North America and Alaska and Hawaii, typically our target market tends to be reservation communities or high concentrations of Native American populations in extremely rural areas. This was all intentional in many regards, in that when we looked at the removal of Native people and where we ended up on federally designated reservations, typically are extremely remote and resource deprived. In our language, reservation is Yishkunigan. That literally translates into English as leftovers, meaning leftovers of land. So OWISTA, and as a Native-led, Native-governed organization, we always realized attaining true economic sovereignty entails the prevalence of having capital resources. And what we typically find throughout a lot of rural communities, or particularly Native America, is predatory lending institutions really permeate borders. There aren't a lot of banks operating in our areas, or if they are, they tend to be agricultural banks, and our people historically tended not to have the credit resources to obtain any type of credit. So CDFIs and Native CDFIs have changed the economic landscape of Native communities for the past 20 years. When OWISTA started, and we are still the longest standing intermediary lender, Native CDFI in the nation, that predominantly has a target market of Indian country, there were 2 certified Native CDFIs in 1999 when we started. OWISTA was one, and Lakota Funds, operating out of the Pine Reservation, was the second. Important to note on that regard, they were operating as a revolving loan fund, far beyond CDFIs. But what we found, and what OWISTA, and I think what's really interesting about our programmatic operations and capitalizations, is we meet communities where they're at, and we evolve our services and capitalization to really reflect those needs. So if I look at our last 20 years, I look at OWISTA somewhat in decades, our first lifetime, second, going on to third. What we really did within our first 10 years is build the capacity and help build these organizations throughout all of Indian country. Again, now we have over 70 certified Native CDFIs operating in their community. So we do a lot of capacity building, we do a lot of training and technical assistance. And what's very important in that measure is everything that we do, curriculums, trainings, are culturally relevant. We have the widest used financial education curriculum used in Indian country, with over 35,000 members trained in the past 20 years, who therefore go down and teach this to their communities. So OWISTA typically, in looking at our first 10 years, really helped build and started our investments into these organizations. As we look at how I would really like to say how we've really weaved economic and financial sustainability and education these past several decades. We're really finding a huge capital demand within Indian country for larger endeavors. So we really started off consumer lending on a grassroots level, a lot of small business development, and now really focusing, as well as those other things, on home ownership. So OWISTA, we've modeled our operations throughout these years to really support economic development, capacity building, private sector development, upwards financial mobility for tribal members throughout the nation. One thing that we, however, don't address within our particular niche within the industry is infrastructure type of financing. So while we really look at the individual small business and home ownership efforts, as we know, that's a huge need within rural communities, Native communities. OWISTA not necessarily touching that regard, but I do find, and what's really interesting, OWISTA typically tends to be the first investor into these local organizations, and we've really tried throughout the years to open up and be a bridge to capital as an intermediary. And an intermediary to us really means working ourselves out of a job. We don't want to be the gateholder for measures of capital. We want to see capital flowing into Indian country and try to really be a lever to help that happen and build our sovereignty.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Let's move to Jim to talk about FAHI's role serving Appalachian communities.
Sure, and thank you. I think when you introduced us, you mentioned that FAHI is a membership organization, and when we were formed, it was by our members. We didn't go recruit members or make members; they made us. And so what we think about what they wanted originally, which is still I think very at the center of what we do, is around advocacy and creating collective voice. We have tried to learn to build off of that in terms of what other things can we do better together than we can by ourselves. I think rural communities generally suffer from a lack of scale or the opportunity to take things to scale. And so one thing we can do that, and we do this, I see this in my friends here on the screen, doing the same thing, is that by working with good partners, building trust with folks, you create the capacity to take something to scale that is not about like me going to scale versus you going to scale. It's like, what if we go to scale? And I think so that one, I just would put that out there. I think as a simple theory, when I think about creating change in a place like Appalachia, I think about local leaders. That's where change happens. And local leaders are most effective when they have access to capital and expertise. And so when we think about our CDFI work, what was the other thing you said, Corianne, about typical CDFIs or something? I'd like to find
traditional plus the rural development and capacity building. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to meet a traditional CDFI because I don't know that I have done that, and you certainly won't find that here, right? I think we can identify that as a label, but I think and it's true for us. When I think about then how do we create change, economic change and lasting change, then I want to look for those local leaders and how do we best empower them. Capital and our use of CDFI as a tool, I think then is exactly that, right? It's just one part of our toolbox to go with advocacy and collective work and membership and training and so forth. Capital's like water. Capital flows where it goes the easiest, right? Water flows to where it is the easiest. We are working in places that are difficult. It doesn't mean that they can't work, but it does take a different effort. And so when, in addition to sort of like training, I think about, and we make our work center around what are models where capital needs to bring that value chain together so that it does flow easier than it did before. And where you see the best capacity in local organizations is when there's consistency and predictability to the way money flows, right? I think it's a money problem, not a capacity or a smarts problem. And grants are great, but once the grant is over, then where does the capacity turn to next? And so making that work together and trying to put that together as a sort of value proposition. How we then link our organizations and our partners together to get that sort of more collective impact, I think is one of the things that we really try to do so that we're punching above our weight all the time. So we do have under management just under $300 million, but our balance sheet is actually only $100 million. Last year, we lent $175 million. And you do that by working with friends and leveraging off of that. It's also not what I would consider to be like a robust sort of financial model, right? But it gets the impact we want. Yeah. And we do that across we let members bring that to us. So traditionally, that's been housing, whether multifamily or single family. But also downtown revitalization, community facilities. We do financing directly to nonprofits. We treat them as a business. How do we connect federal money to that local community? I think Bill mentioned something similar. Often our team is the one that helps turnkey for a mayor or a nonprofit or a county judge, an entire project, sort of soup to nuts. But our intent is to leave them with more capacity and more expertise and more community wealth than we found them.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Nick, how about a bit on how CDCB and the multi-bank helps to serve the Rio Grande Valley?
Thanks, Corianne. Yeah, I think everybody before me kind of used the term, we fill the gaps, right? We go to where things are needed. Historically, we've been in housing. We were actually founded a little under 50 years ago. And our first mission was to build and replace 1,800 outhouses that were in the city of Brownsville. And now we've grown to be the largest, one of the largest producers of affordable housing in the state of Texas. However, we're still finding and building new bathrooms. And so we use housing as a way to build wealth, is what we like to say. And so our main goal is to build wealth for families. And we use a couple of tools to do that. Lending is one of those. And so it's really trying to figure out how do we deploy that capital in places that need to happen. And we come to that solution from the ground up. We're very, very aware of what we saw. 1,984 people walk through the door of CDCB last year to buy a new house. And we listen very closely what they say and what their needs are and what's influencing their life, both positively and negatively. And from that, we've built products to answer that. So we do alternative payday lending. We have 19 franchises across the United States now that do that, many of them in rural areas. Affordable housing, both on the rental side as on the single family side. We're a mortgage lender where we have more mortgage products here than any mortgage lender in the Rio Grande Valley or in South Texas. And so we try to, we give people choice. Our tagline is choice empowers. We believe that giving people that choice, whether it be how they design their house or what type of loan product they're going to need, what time of education. We run a training and GED school as well for high school dropouts. So wherever's needed, whatever's needed, we try to fill that. And we don't go where we're not good at doing it, right? But we do look for folks who can do it and try to connect them. And that's part of the reason that we are here with these 5 incredibly intelligent people, because they can do some other things that we can't do. And being together and working together really makes us better than who we were before we joined PRT.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Ines, tell us a little bit about Communities Unlimited and the role that you all play in rural development, capacity building, and finance.
Thanks, Corianne, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ines Polonis with Communities Unlimited, and we have feet on the ground in about 600 communities across 7 states in the South, from Texas to Tennessee. And we're a rural development hub, which means we look at rural issues from a holistic perspective and then try to muscle in the resources to solve those. In about 30 communities that invite us in, we start by building a local leadership team, a diverse local leadership team that may well include folks that have never led before. And we're trying to build the capacity of that team to create a very simple 5-step strategy to move their community toward prosperity, and then bring in the resources to help implement that plan. So it's not just something on paper that's sitting somewhere. So that's done with our community sustainability team, and they really shepherd that leadership team for a number of years. They then bring in our environmental team that focuses on ensuring that the community has safe drinking water and adequate wastewater facilities to make sure that economic development is even feasible and possible in that community. The leadership team is focused on how to generate economic activity through entrepreneurship. And so the entrepreneurship team comes in and helps start businesses, grow existing businesses, help businesses through COVID, quite frankly, and help them sustain themselves, as well as transition viable businesses to the next generation so that we don't lose that economic engine in these communities. And then they also bring in our healthy foods team that really focuses, especially in food deserts, how do we get fresh fruit and vegetables to families that live in these places that have lost their grocery store? All of that work is supported by our community development financial institution, and we lend into every one of those areas, because all the capacity building in the world isn't helpful if you don't at some point also have the capital resources to actually make those things happen. And so that's sort of how we look at the work holistically, and we provide individual services to communities when they request them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those amazing overviews of really the complex work that you all are doing individually and together. You've already mentioned this a little bit, but you all serve rural communities of color. How do the legacies of racial and ethnic injustices affect your work today? And I'd love to give Bill and Crystal and Nick an opportunity to all respond. Bill, would you like to continue your thoughts there first?
In Mississippi today, if you are a white family with $40,000 net worth, you're more likely to get approved for a mortgage than a black household that makes $150,000. In Arkansas, where 16% of the population is black, SBA's 7(a) program, which is the primary federal program that runs through traditional banks to close capital gaps for businesses, only 1.2% of SBA loans go to black entrepreneurs. These are systemic gaps, discrimination within the existing finance system. And if you look across the South, we're in Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Tennessee. And you lay a map where you see where slaveholding was greatest before the Civil War, and where you have the highest rates of unbanked, the lowest, worst housing conditions, worst education facilities, worst healthcare outcomes, jobs, unemployment, highest rates of predatory lending. It's the same areas 400 years later. And so, yeah, there's a legacy of discrimination and race in the financing system in our region. In Selma is still one of the poorest towns in the state of Alabama, decades after John Lewis and Martin Luther King led the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And so those gaps aren't being filled by traditional financial institutions. And so we try to step in and close those gaps. We took over several bank branches over the years that have closed, particularly after the financial crisis, when over 2,000 bank branches closed across the country, 90+% in low-income census tracts, disproportionately communities of color. In Itabena, Mississippi, we opened an account for a 100-year-old woman using money from her birthday. She had never felt welcome enough in a traditional bank to open an account. 100 years old, it shouldn't take that long for someone to be respected by a financial institution that benefits from federal insurance, federal support. And so those are the challenges that we all have to challenge, and they're most severe in communities of color. And so we, fortunately, we're seeing more support to attack those issues, but they are severe. And just one of the last point I make is CDFIs are not all made equal. The folks on this call and CDFIs that are truly mission oriented are important, but we've seen with the advent of more and more CDFI resources, there are a lot of CDFIs in name only that are competing and getting these resources, and they're not going to the communities that need it most. In Mississippi, we did analysis of mortgage lending that showed that Mississippi now has more CDFIs than any place in the country. And the CDFI banks, average mortgage lending, reported lending is 17% to Black borrowers. This is a state that's 40% Black almost. 17% of all mortgage lending goes to Black borrowers. Only 13% of the CDFIs mortgage lending went to Black borrowers. So that's the tide that we're swimming against. And so this work is critical.
Yeah. Crystal, how about giving you the opportunity to elaborate a bit more on how these legacies affect the people and places that you work with?
Thank you. And this is a very interesting, I think, and poignant question, especially at this time as we're looking at America and somewhat coming to terms with who we are and how we were built and racial injustices, and looking on a financial sense at this question. A lot of times what you'll find discriminatory still yet is an underrepresentation in any measure of Native American communities, period. So being able to get on the table for policy, for further capitalization efforts, and also based on our sovereignty status, which essentially means we're a country within a country, there can be some maneuvers that we have to go through, for instance, with trust land issues to build homes or to retain collateral for small business development. And looking particularly though, and this is something that I think is interwoven into our Native communities, into our populations, translates into our work. And looking at these historic injustices, we just celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day Monday. And October is Indigenous Peoples Month. What we know, what we learn, and what we know as Native people in this land is so far beyond 180 degrees than what America as a whole. Just very quickly, most of us don't know. Do you know it was 1924 until Native Americans were allowed citizenship in the United States? It was 1978 when we were finally awarded the ability to practice our own religion, the Native American Freedom of Religion Act. As we look now, we have got missing and murdered Indigenous women. We've got residential children being, brung up from federal policy that murdered thousands upon thousands on both borders, we're finding. So in looking at isolation, a lot of this economic disparity, which I don't want to paint a horrible picture, that's not true, because we have so many positive endeavors that combat this. But I think in particular, looking at racial and historic injustices, we're finding ways to incorporate ourselves within these measures. Collaborations, for instance, with Partners for Rural Transformation has incredibly broadened opportunities for Indian country in these measures, with partnerships, collaborations, possible pilot projects. But I think in this regard, we still have the lowest home ownership rates in Indian country, small business, or more so, no data. So being able to find and contrive the data is still incredibly difficult, and as well as incredibly difficult, but I think that we're coming to a measure of further coordination, just insofar as having to battle against so many false narratives, which each one of our regions have to do. And so far as investment is risky, there's, what are we propelling on an economic sense? It's, A, B, or C. So I think with that, we have our own unique challenges, especially within the history and opportunity of this country. But CDFIs really are providing that avenue of hope, opportunity, financing, capacity building, meeting communities where they're at. And these collaborations, and the more I think we can get on national standpoints to show our opportunities and success, the better for all marginalized communities. Yeah. Because in the end, we have so many things in common that we find rather than our differences.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us. Nick, I'd love to give you the opportunity to respond about how these legacies affect the people and regions that you all are serving.
Yeah, thanks. So a friend of mine says that, if you can't steal from a poor person on the US-Mexico border, then you're not working hard enough. The whole system here has been set up to steal from low-income Latinos who are on the border. Now, when you look at the numbers, we're 98%, 95 to 98% Latino within 150 miles of the border, all the way from California down here to Texas. So when you look at the numbers, you're like, well, everybody, all the loans done, all the mortgage loans done in the Rio Grande Valley are going to Latino folks. But then when you peel some of that back and you start looking at, the products that are offered, you start looking at the products that are not offered when it comes to financing. You start seeing some real, as Bill said, some real structural issues. there are 26 payday lenders within 3 blocks of my office in downtown Brownsville. I literally, when I go out for a walk at lunch, I counted them about 6 months ago. It was a fun activity to have during lunch, but it is just pervasive. The amount of work that is put in to steal from folks, and mainly because they're brown. And we've just came through a period in this country where, leaders pointed at my community and said, they're bad. Don't trust them. They will steal from you and they will rape your wives and children. That was literally what was out there. And so, how does it affect us? It affects us continuously, right? And again, what's offered and what's not offered. And so we're here to change that narrative. We're here to offer things that are not offered. We're here to create new opportunities that we've just been neglected because nobody wants to deal with the border. Turn on the news tonight. I guarantee you, within 15 minutes of watching the news, you're going to hear some story about my community that, quite frankly, is a little bit embellished. And, but why would you want to invest money in this community if that's what you're watching on the news? Why would you want to do, anything positive in a place where we're looked to be awful? And so it affects us in a lot of ways. Health outcomes, educational outcomes, home ownership outcomes. It's just pervasive. And so, as bad as I make it sound, it's an incredible place to live, an incredible place to be from. And, despite all of that, our folks are just turning around saying, no, we're, like they always have, we will continue on and we will do what we need to do and make it happen. Our mayor said the other day is like, my goal for the next 2 years is to not come up as the poorest city in the nation and not have another colonia developed within our area again. And so, that's a great goal to have. And the fact that we can actually say that and hope and work toward it is positive. But, racial justice it's all based on that. Everything's based on that. And the way things are looked at. So it is part of who we are and what we do.
Yeah. Thank you all for those really important perspectives. The work continues for sure. In the interest of time, to give you all a final word before we turn to some audience questions, the federal government has lots of plans or potential plans for rural America right now. I would like each of you to tell us what you believe the one thing is that they can do that would be most impactful for the people and places that you serve in rural and Native America. And you're welcome to, whoever wants to kick that off can go for it.
Corianne, maybe I'll just jump in here.
Yes,
because
go for it.
Some of the most important work that the Partners for Rural Transformation do together is on this policy question. And so all of us have worked really closely in support of the Rural Partnership Program, which is a $4 billion program at this time in the Build Back Better reconciliation package. This is a game changer for rural communities in general, and especially for those in persistent poverty areas, because it is relatively flexible money. It is money that a local leader can get over a 5-year period of time to really make change and not have these constant 1-year starts and stops that Jim talked about earlier. So it really gives folks the opportunity to address some of those barriers to prosperity that our leadership teams identify every day. I think the other piece of it is we need to look at it from a lens of climate change readiness. I mean, I'm sitting in the South, and it is predominantly communities of color and rural communities of color that are hit by the hurricanes and devastated, by tornadoes, by flooding. And the help to those communities always comes last. And I think what we can do with this kind of funding is get these communities ready and more resilient so that they can address these changes that are going to impact them here over the next decade and longer. So that's an area that we've been really active in, and I think it's a really important part of the White House agenda, and it needs to make its way through reconciliation.
Suzanne, one thing that the federal government can do that will be most impactful.
So I'll make this a combo statement. First of all, to Inez's comment, totally impactful. But don't give us money to do more plans that sit on shelves. Get us money on the ground that we can actually do something with. Give us longevity with that. Give us the time. And then the other thing I would say, and this has come up several times in the last few days, but make sure that it gets to the folks who need it the worst, the most underserved communities. Don't take the low-hanging fruit. Go for the gusto. Get it into those communities that need it the most. So that was a compound thought.
Yeah, awesome. Jim, how about you? One strategy, one thing that they can do right now that will be most impactful for Appalachia.
Yeah, I'm so frustrated with myself, Corianne, because I was hoping to have some pithy, silly answer about just one. I can barely narrow it down, right? Because it feels like there's a plethora of things where there's been so much neglect about sort of basic strategy and policy. And so we've been promoting an income eligibility piece through PRT and some other national partners. And that certainly would be very helpful, but that would only work if some other things also happen. And so I'm gonna just turn on this a little bit and say, what we really need is a federal strategy that folks like us help design, and that there would be a sense of control about what those monies are. If you think about how like the Community Development Block Grant Program works, if I'm in Louisville, I get an amount of entitlement money, and I get to design based on what I know in my community, what my response will be with those monies and what impact is needed by my folks. If I'm in a rural place, I have to actually compete for something that's generally called in states balance of funds or balance of state. And now I'm in a competitive environment with my own neighbors. So I think, yes, a completely different approach that would actually mirror more the way that I think metropolitan areas are treated would be a game changer.
Crystal, how about you? Strategy, one thing the federal government could do that would be most impactful for the people that you work with.
Well, this would take an act of Congress, and I've been hoping for this for the past 20 years. So I will say it once again, but I think something very, very pertinent when we look at community economic development, when we look at the lack of infrastructure, we look at what all of our respective organizations do to fill these gaps. One thing overall that incredibly affects our communities, and I can say on a personal level at our tribe in North Dakota, is the federal government's requirement for matching funds for certain government infrastructure, any grant programs that help build. So that can be water systems, that could be daycares, that could be dialysis centers, A, B, or C, but essentially this means this poor community has to provide a 20% cash match to get these millions of dollars to do A, B, or C. If the federal government was able to waive a matching fund waiver for persistent poverty areas, we would see infrastructure, in my mind, or in tribal communities flourish like we never have and be able to build upon that long-standing stability that we all need. And I think especially to note, and this was somewhat derived from our previous panelist comments, but when we look at climate change and we look at how that's affecting in the billions and billions and billions of dollars, a lot of these communities here too, even though they're extremely poor, not necessarily persistent poverty, they're not going to have resources to do those type of initiatives as well. So we really need to look at skin in the game as the federal government, wants to have some sort of our own assets or credibility established with these funding endeavors, but really looking at that realistically to build what we need to for our future generations.
Thank you. Nick?
Well, obviously ditto, but as said before, but I think in general, it's more of like is welcome to the game recently. I'd like to say to the federal government, and then secondly would be stay involved, not just because you think that it's going to win you more votes, but I think it's been learned over the last couple of years that there are real needs, there are real really some things that can be done in rural areas, and also things that rural areas bring to the table that have been discounted or overlooked, and we need those to be out in front. And so stay engaged, stay really stay engaged, not just to win the votes for the next round of elections, but really because you want to do something. It would be my request, because we're always here. The six of us will talk to you. Pick up the phone. We'll give you all the answers that you need, but stay engaged, please.
Great. Bill, we'll let you have the last word on this before we turn to audience questions.
Oh, no, Nick, I have more questions than I have answers most of the time, but I found that when disasters occur, like the ones we're experiencing now, racial justice, social justice, healthcare crisis, we saw it after Hurricane Katrina, we saw it after the financial crisis. When disasters occur, billions are plowed into the economy, but unfortunately, the gaps have gotten wider. It's the robber barons who have profited. And so I really think as these billions get plowed into the economy, trillions, quite honestly, investments have to be targeted to the areas of greatest need. Got to make existing programs work better for rural America. It can't be like we've seen in the past where with new markets, for example, 65% of new market allocations in persistent poverty counties went to 6 urban areas, while just 5% went to rural persistent poverty areas. That's widening the gaps. And these investments have to be targeted to where the need is greatest and make existing programs work better for rural America. Got to ensure that investment and opportunity don't continue to be redlined, and the quality housing, good jobs, clean water, healthy food, bank branches, healthy and prosperous families aren't just found on the wealthy side of the railroad track.
Thank you so much for this great discussion. We have gotten in some good questions from the audience. The first one I would like to pose to you all is, where have you seen rural and remote communities successfully planning around and capitalizing on local community assets? What types of rural community assets tend to lead to significant external investment? This is open to anyone who would like to respond.
I'll just throw in one example. We worked in several small towns here in Mississippi and increasingly across the region, and we asked them, what do you need to improve conditions? And then we try to tailor our tools, but we don't have enough tools. We try to bring in other investments from public dollars, try to help them apply for grants, but we try to align the resources with their needs. And whenever you target your products and services, your programs to meet the needs of the community, you're going to get good results, whether that's just a neighborhood or a town or regional planning, the closer you are to the target, the more likely you're going to hit it. And so in listening, any planning effort, any strategy that's anchored in community is going to be more likely to be successful.
Corianne, one of the largest assets that most of our communities have in terms of investment is their water system or their wastewater system. And I think that is an area where over time, federal investment has gone from mostly grants to mostly loans. In persistent poverty areas where this infrastructure is now 40, 50 years old and needs to be replaced, and that community's been hit by COVID hard and they couldn't collect on the arrears because they couldn't turn people's water off in the middle of COVID. But then at the same time, they got hit by a climate event. These communities can't take on more debt. And so I think there's a huge opportunity here to really build on those assets and make sure that we're maintaining those assets. And sometimes those are small investments and sometimes those are large investments, but there needs to be a better balance of grants and loans to make that happen.
We have another question on working with state government, and folks are interested in any thoughts and success stories you all have in effectively partnering with state governments to do the work that you do.
Well, maybe I'll start. I think that where we see most of the backbone of our work has been with housing finance agencies and governor's offices in the various states we work. It tends to work well when we come to the table together to talk about what a problem is, and we work on a solution where we get treated like a partner in delivery. With the HFAs, if you want to serve the lowest income households with a housing solution in a large part of our service area, that's going to be my members that touch those folks, not the bank, not the mortgage revenue bond program. It's about connecting the money to the folks who are closest to the ground on that. And then more recently, we worked with Health and Human Services on moving a voucher program for people who are coming out of drug recovery. And they were unable to connect because they didn't know who the partners were in local communities. In a relatively 60 days, we got 4 offices up and running, and now we're active all over the state, and begging for money when they were unable to move any money at all. And we couldn't have done it without them, but they couldn't do it without us.
Yeah, and I just leaned in here. We have been successful in initially California and now in other states at bringing CDFIs together so that we're collectively talking to the state and collectively aggregating the needs that we see across and partnering with our urban partners. So that has worked out well for us in California. The other thing in our region that has worked out well is the issue of wastewater and septic tanks and all of those things that are very rural in nature, and wells. When we had the drought, we were able to, because we had built relationships with the state, a lot of times we are the first ones at the table. As Jim said, being at the table, solving a problem with them is really a critical thing. And so that has really worked well for the states where we have those kinds of relationships, for us to be able to be a conduit for the rural persistent poverty areas that see the most impact when wells go dry and septic tanks working. So,
And I'd like to just say that we often find ourselves, unfortunately, arm wrestling with the states, to put it mildly, in our region. They're just not the most, they don't often prioritize the communities that we serve, and historically that's been the case. And so we've found we get much more traction working with local mayors, local officials, the municipal level, who unfortunately have historically not had a hell of a lot of resources to work with. But we hope that as more of the federal dollars under the current administration are targeted to local municipalities, that'll give them a little bit more leverage. But
Yeah.
the state level officials in this region are not as they don't prioritize the needs of our communities as much as they may in other parts of the country.
Yeah, thanks for that important distinction. We've reached the end of our time together. I really want to thank all 6 of you for sharing about your work today towards transforming rural persistent poverty into prosperity. And thank you to everyone who attended today. We'd really appreciate it if you take a couple of minutes to complete the event survey and let us know your thoughts about the event. And with that, we really wish everyone a great day. Thanks for joining us and take care. Goodbye. Thanks so much.